Hi, Lori here with Food Plus Detroit, and today, in honor of International Composting Awareness Week, I'll be talking about my own journey composting at work. I'll talk about why I compost, where you can compost, and what happens to compost once it's created. Composting is a great way to divert organic materials from landfills or incinerators. Composting is the process of decomposing organic materials like food waste or yard waste into a nutrient-rich soil amendment. When you create compost, the materials that you use would have otherwise ended up in a landfill. Landfills are like giant engineered garbage cans. It's a big hole in the ground that's lined with thick plastic, like the garbage can in your kitchen is lined with a plastic bag, and it's really designed to store those materials in place. It doesn't allow them to decompose properly. So instead, they'll decompose very, very slowly over time and release methane gas into our atmosphere. But when you compost, on the other hand, it's a controlled form of decomposition that results in a nutrient-rich soil. Composting can also sustain 4 times the jobs as landfilling or incineration. So it's great for our soil, great for our food, and great for our economy. My personal reason for composting is really to inspire other people to think about where their food comes from and where it's going. That's why I chose to start composting at work and at school. But there's a lot of different places that you could compost. You can compost in your own backyard. You can compost at a community scale composting center or at a commercial scale composting facility. You can compost at school, at work, at home, at special events, and even on holidays. There's a lot of options, and it really just depends on what kind of space you have, what kind of time you have, and what you would like to do. I first became interested in composting at school when I attended the University of Colorado. For the first time ever, I saw composting bins in public spaces for people to use. If I went to the dining hall, I could compost my leftover food. If I went to a sports game at the basketball stadium or the football stadium, I would be able to compost food from the concession stand. And these experiences really got me thinking about why I had never seen this process at home. Composting always seemed really confusing to me. It seemed like something that would be difficult to do, but here it was, like right in the dining hall at school, right at the athletic facilities. So when I came home, I continued to think about composting and why it didn't exist in the spaces I was familiar with. And then I started talking to the people around me. And I found that there's a lot of people who are interested in the environment and even interested in composting. A lot of the jobs that I've had are food related. So I've really had a unique opportunity to blend composting into my work. I worked at the Eastern Market. I worked at Gleaners Community Food Bank, and right now I'm working with Wayne Metro Community Action Agency's Head Start food program. So every time I get a new job, I try to talk to people and find others who are like-minded, people who are interested and will sit with me and talk about composting in an enthusiastic way. And then I brainstorm, like, how can we make this happen here? What little step can we take to make this a greener place than it was before we started? And when I was at Gleaners, that looked like having some compost pilots at food pantries. The first pilot I did in partnership with Nico, and Nico worked at the Mercado Food Hub in Southwest Detroit. So he was really enthusiastic about composting, and he began to collect some of the extra food waste that was not suitable to give away to anybody, but was suitable for composting. And he would drive it to composting facilities in his own car. And then Gleaners became interested, and they said, you know what, we will fund this. We're going to allow you to get 1 bin of compost. And we called Midtown Composting, who's a local hauler, and he picked up food from the pantry and then delivered it to a large scale composting facility where it was processed into that nutrient rich soil amendment. And then after Gleaners, I ended up working for Wayne Metro. My first assignment was to partner with Fish and Loaves Community Food Pantry. While I was there, we started a composting pilot as well, with just one bin being picked up each week. And we did run into some difficulties because the food pantry is ran primarily by volunteers. So it takes a lot of time and energy sometimes to organize that food into a composting system. And we did run into some issues with that at Fish and Loaves. And then I was moved over to the Head Start food program. So now I'm really taking a look at this food program as a whole and brainstorming how can I incorporate composting for the Head Start students and also for our kitchens. And, I'm kind of in the beginning of that process. I'm not sure exactly where it will lead, but I've definitely found it beneficial to talk to others within the workplace about composting, because even if you cannot get your organization to start composting, even if it's not the right time or the funding isn't there or the manpower isn't there, even just having these discussions can really cement in people's minds that there's a better way to deal with the waste that we are creating. And it's really difficult because there isn't the infrastructure there, right? You can't call the garbage man to come and pick up your compost. It takes a specialized system, one that we don't really have in place in Michigan yet. But there's a lot of people who are interested and who can help you to begin composting. Like I mentioned, Midtown Compost is a hauler who will come and pick up compost from different residences, businesses, and even schools. And I've been working with Food Plus Detroit, who is starting some compost pilots around the city of Detroit to learn how to do community composting at a mid-sized scale, where folks will come and drop off materials from Wayne State University to a local farm, and that farmer is trained to process the compost into a nutrient-rich soil amendment. And then that brings me to, where does the compost go? If you provide food waste or yard waste to a community scale composter, the compost that they create is most likely going to go right into their garden. It's going to create the next round of local produce grown right in your own community. And I think right here, I want to say too that composting is a place-based business. It's something that cannot be exported to another location, right? I mean, I guess you could haul that food waste to another state if you really wanted to, but that's not the most efficient way. It's a process that really has to stay local. And when composting stays local, the money that's made by composting also stays local. So composting can be a local food benefit, but it also has many other benefits. Composting can be used in stormwater management, and it is already used in stormwater management in compost filter socks. So what that is like a giant sock, right? That's full of compost. And when water passes through that sock, it is filtered. So you're filtering out sediments and different kinds of contaminants that would end up in your water system. But when it goes through the compost, it's filtered. Compost can also hold water in place. So on a heavy rain, it can hold the compost in the ground so that it doesn't all flood our stormwater system at one time. And while the compost is holding that water in the ground, it will provide some filtration to the water. And that can actually be paired up with native plants to create a rain garden where there's compost and there's native plants that have really deep roots in the soil. And both of those things are working together to filter out different sediments and contaminants from the groundwater before it returns to our water system. Compost can also be used in green infrastructure projects. So whenever a new building goes up, you can use compost in the creation of that space. You can backfill demolition sites with compost, and you can really just highlight the fact that compost is used in public spaces to get people thinking about, what is compost? Where does it come from? And yeah, that's really all I got. I just wanted to talk today about why I compost, where you can compost, and where compost is used. I would love to hear your feedback and let me know if you've talked about composting at your school. Have you talked about composting at work? How did that go for you? Feel free to connect, and thank you so much for joining today.